If we travel at all, it won't be to here. And for sure it won't be here. We'll go elsewhere.
With everything going on south of the border, it just seemed to be a lot safer to just travel within Canada.
Just one casual remark cost the US nearly $30 billion in tourism revenue from Canadian visitors. Does that sound normal? Not at all. It was a fatal blow to the American tourism industry, from Florida to Buffalo, from Maine to Las Vegas. Florida is still sunny with blue seas. The Walmart in Buffalo is still lit up. Las Vegas is still dazzling with neon lights. But the Canadian wallets that once poured tens of billions of dollars into the US each year are now tightly closed. In just one summer, border crossings decreased by 37%. Flights from Canada dropped by 26%, and many stores saw a 30% decrease in revenue. And what's behind those numbers? The hotel has rooms available. The restaurant is closed. Employees are losing their jobs. And do you know what the most ironic thing is? The politician only said a few words, but it was the average American who paid the price. And in the coming minutes, we'll count down 7 truths that few dare to speak, to clearly see the price America is paying for ignoring its northern friend. Let's get started. Look at this. Florida confidently boasted about the record numbers they achieved in the last quarter, welcoming over 34.4 million tourists, the most ever. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But try stepping out of the tourism officials' conference room and walking along Clearwater or Fort Lauderdale Beach, and you'll hear a completely different story. A small hotel owner in the Tampa Bay area put it bluntly, "We still have a lot of guests, but revenue is down." The Canadians who used to rent entire houses for 2 to 3 weeks and spend freely in restaurants are now gone. They called me and said, "Sorry, but we won't be back." It seems the saying, "time heals all wounds," is no longer true for Canadian tourists and their desire to vacation in the United States. On NBC News, Mr. Amir Ailon, president and CEO of Longwoods International, a market research company that regularly surveys Canadian consumers, stated, "Canadians are already concerned about their personal finances, but they place great importance on statements and policies from the US government. Unfortunately, the situation is getting worse. If you only watch the news, you might think Florida is still crowded. Domestic American tourists driving from Georgia or flying from New York could fill the numbers, but they couldn't make up for the deep pockets of Canadian visitors. A Canadian family visiting Florida in the winter often spends twice or even 3 times as much as a middle-class American family. They rent long-term, eat at restaurants, play golf, and shop at outlets. And domestic tourists? Many people only stay for 2 to 3 nights and then leave. The result? The seaside restaurant is empty of regular customers, the souvenir shop earns less, and staff hours are being cut. For small communities in Florida, a 20 to 30% drop in revenue isn't just a number. It means not being able to pay rent, steak missing from the dinner table, and only cheap sandwiches left. And here's the irony. Florida still has blue seas, white sand, and golden sunshine. The only thing that disappeared was the Canadian wallet. Officials are still reporting that everything is fine, but ordinary Americans, shopkeepers, hotel staff, taxi drivers, are sitting on pins and needles. We, ordinary Americans, understand better than anyone else. A close friend is worth more than 100 fleeting acquaintances. And when Canada left, Florida didn't just lose tourists. They lost the stability they had taken for granted for so many years. And what's even scarier is, Florida isn't the only state feeling the cold from the north. Border cities like Buffalo, Maine, and Vermont are all gradually realizing that when Canada turns its back, the heavy bill will fall on whose shoulders? When Canadians stopped crossing the border, Buffalo clearly heard the sound of the safe closing. For decades, border towns like Buffalo, Plattsburgh, or coastal towns in Maine have thrived on the familiar routine of millions of Canadian families, driving for a few hours, shopping at Walmart, having dinner at an American restaurant, and then staying overnight in a hotel. A simple economic circle, but enough to feed the entire community. Now that circle is broken. Since the beginning of the year, the volume of Canadian vehicles crossing the border has plummeted by 28 to 37%. In Buffalo, parking lots that were once packed with Ontario and Quebec license plates are now so empty you can count the cars on your fingers. A restaurant in Niagara Falls had to close after 6 months due to lack of customers. And in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, the surf shop owner stated bluntly, revenue decreased by 25% in just 1 month. A few years ago, the entire summer was fully booked by Canadian guests. To outsiders, it's just a few percentage points of decline in the report. But for a small town, it's their livelihood. A restaurant loses customers, leading to staff layoffs, which in turn affects the local supply chain, from vegetable farms and bakeries to the taxi driver. Just a few thousand Canadian families crossing the border caused the entire town to cut back on meals, postpone roof repairs, or cancel their long-awaited vacations. And here's the bitter truth. Politicians can talk about trade sovereignty, about tariff victories. But in Buffalo or Maine, that political victory is paid for with an unpaid electricity bill, a new for lease sign popping up. You don't need to read the GDP report to understand what's happening. Just drive past the Walmart parking lot in Plattsburgh and look at the empty spaces that no longer have Canadian license plates. Those empty spaces are the holes in the wallets of the entire American border community. And the worrying thing is, this isn't stopping at a few border towns. Because when Canadians start voting with their wallets at supermarket checkouts, liquor stores, or even on the real estate market, the ripple effect will be much greater. Do you think Canadians will simply stop going to Florida or Las Vegas? Number. They've taken this boycott all the way to the shopping carts in supermarkets and even to the liquor shelves in their local stores. In Toronto or Vancouver, phone apps that help consumers trace the origin of products are now being downloaded rapidly. Canadians scan barcodes on their phones to make sure the beef, bottle of ketchup, or case of beer they're buying isn't connected to the US. This is no longer an isolated act, but a patriotic consumer movement. And it directly targets products that were once familiar to millions of families. Liquor stores in many Canadian provinces even went further. They completely removed all American wine and whiskey from their shelves. The result? US wine exports to Canada plummeted by over 60%, equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars evaporating. A number that would make any bourbon distillery in Kentucky break out in a cold sweat. The irony is that many American breweries, already struggling due to tariffs, are now facing even greater challenges. Aluminum for beer cans imported from Canada is taxed, and grains are also more expensive. And yet now, Canadian tourists, a large market right next door, are turning their backs all at once. They've just lost their source of cheap supply and their loyal customers as well. It's like being caught between a rock and a hard place. Just imagine, every can of beer, every bottle of wine is a bridge connecting neighbours. Canadians go to Buffalo to buy bourbon to bring back as gifts, or American families go skiing in Quebec and share Canadian beer. Now those bridges are broken. Instead, on a Canadian family's weekend dinner table, Chilean wine or Mexican tequila replaces American bourbon. And the Budweiser beer can? Stay on the shelf, gather dust. We, ordinary Americans, understand very well the significance of this. This isn't just a loss of export revenue. It's a frightening sign that the closest neighbour is using their own wallet to send a message. We don't need American goods. And once consumer habits have changed, it's very difficult to get them back. And here's the ultimate irony. From beer cans to whiskey glasses, even the foam smells political. Politicians may say we're winning in trade, but Americans working in breweries and distilleries are wondering if they can afford their rent this month. So if there are no more Canadian customers, where will the US find customers? And the answer will make many of us frown. When Canada turned its back, who did America look around and see? China and Mexico. Does that sound familiar? For so many years, Politicians have chanted the slogan, "America first," boasting that we don't need anyone else. And yet, now, from Las Vegas to New York, the US tourism industry is sitting down to discuss. If we don't have Canada, we might have to find Chinese or Mexican tourists to fill the gap. Let's take Las Vegas as an example. This city has a fairly stable number of Canadian visitors, big spenders, and long-stay vacationing families. But now, with data showing a 33% drop in Canadian visitors to Vegas compared to last year, casinos are forced to shift their focus to high rollers from Mexico or group tourists from China. What's the problem? Canadians go to Vegas like they're going home, easily, familiarly, comfortably. What about Chinese tourists? Distant, dependent on visa policies, and volatile, according to the Times. Mexican guests? They are also stressed because of politics and borders. Thus, the paradox emerged. The America First policy ultimately pushed the United States into greater dependence on unstable markets. And don't forget, Canadian visitors spend a lot and consistently. They rent long-term, booking rooms a year in advance. Meanwhile, group tours from China can be cancelled entirely due to an unexpected diplomatic tension. Mexican tourists could turn back immediately if there are any further border restrictions. Betting the future of American tourism on these markets is like playing roulette. The ball could land on red, but it's also easy to lose everything. This is the most ironic thing. When a leader shouts, "We don't need Canada," ordinary Americans, hotel owners in Vegas, Uber drivers in Miami, bartenders in New York, are waiting for Chinese or Mexican guests to pay their rent. America first? It sounds more like "America, please come" than anything else. But before blaming Mexico or China, ask, why is Canada, a close friend and blood relative, so angry? And the answer begins with words that seem harmless, but cost the entire American economy dearly. There are sayings that sound like jokes at first, but when they come out of a politician's mouth, they have the impact of a bomb. And here's a prime example. Canada should be America's 51st state. A saying is uttered, perhaps with irony, perhaps to elicit laughter in a certain hall. But in the North, Canadians didn't find it funny at all. For them, it was a direct blow to national pride. Put yourself in that position. Would you want to spend money on a vacation in a place whose leaders imply that your country should only be a dependent state? The Canadian answer was very clear. No, thank you. And they prove that with their actions. A recent survey shows that 77% of Canadians have a more negative view of the US after a series of statements and tariff policies. About 70% of respondents said they would avoid traveling to the US. It wasn't just a few individuals, but millions of families, millions of wallets closing simultaneously. The impact is clear for everyone to see. From a 26% drop in flights to a more than 30% decline in road travel, and the US wine export industry losing over 60% in Canada. In total, according to tourism economics estimates, the cost could reach $9 billion. One word and tens of billions of dollars vanished. This is the most bitter part. If words were gold, this sentence would have to be worth radioactive uranium. It not only caused a stir, but also left a lasting impact, fracturing one of the world's closest trade relationships. And remember, it's the ordinary Americans, the small hotel owners in Florida, the restaurant workers in Buffalo, the taxi drivers in Las Vegas, who are bearing the brunt of the consequences. It's not the politicians, but we, ordinary Americans, who will pay the price for every word. But Canada isn't the only exception. In fact, history has shown many times that the world has turned its back on the US in a similar way. And that's what's much more concerning. This isn't the first time the world has said, "No, thank you, America." In fact, history has repeatedly shown that when politics crosses the line, consumers react. And they react in the most painful way, by stopping spending. Let's go back to the early 2000s. The French once called for French fries to be renamed freedom fries, but it was the European people themselves who quietly boycotted American goods. Sales of some American brands in France and Germany plummeted, as people saw spending money as a strong statement. Let's look at Asia. Japan and South Korea, two close allies of the US, also followed suit. After intense trade competition between the two sides, South Korean citizens overwhelmingly boycotted Japanese cars and beer. In just a few months, sales of Toyota and Asahi in South Korea plummeted to an unbelievable extent. It's living proof that consumption can become a powerful weapon. What's the difference here? Canada is neither a competitor nor a stranger. Canada is a neighbor, the largest trading partner, and the country with the longest shared border with the United States. And it's they themselves who once considered America the default destination for travel and shopping, who are now choosing to turn away. What does that mean? It shows that the US is gradually losing immunity to global boycotts. In the past, people could be angry at America, but still spend money there. Now, it's different. With just a few words, a few policies, an entire community of millions is ready to open their wallets. And ironically, when even the kindest neighbors say no, perhaps the problem isn't with the neighbors. It lies in how the US is treating relationships that seemed unshakable. And this is the most noteworthy part. When Canada and the world simultaneously turn their backs, who will be the first to bear the consequences? It's not the politicians in Washington, but rather us, ordinary Americans. And that's the story of the next section. A man is sitting in an office signing an order, and immediately a shop owner in Maine had to close. Is that fair? That's the price of a game of chess. Revenue in Florida dropped 30%. A family restaurant in Niagara Falls hung a closed sign after months of poor business. Staff at the coastal resort had their shifts cut, and bartenders in Vegas had to take on a second job to pay rent. This is no longer just about numbers on a report. It's about our dinner, our utility bills, and our own retirement dreams. Canadians chose not to go to the US anymore, and as a result, ordinary Americans were the first to take the hit. Middle-class families are under even more pressure. Rent is unpaid, and credit card debt is piling up. Older workers worry, will I still have a shift next week? A few thousand Canadian families cancelled their trips to Florida, and immediately tens of thousands of American families lost their familiar income. The slogan once chanted was, "America first." But in reality, small businesses and wage earners are pushed to the back of the line. If there were an award for America last, perhaps the small towns in Buffalo, Maine and Vermont would be the first to receive it. This is the saddest part. We didn't create the tariff policy. We didn't say Canada should be the 51st state. But it's us, ordinary Americans, who are the ones experiencing the lack of a loaf of bread on the table, a refrigerator without beef, or a cancelled vacation. Politicians may argue in the halls, but the bills still get sent straight to our homes. And that's a bitter reminder. A decision at the top can shake the whole little house on the ground floor. So, if this situation continues, what will happen to the US economy and to us, ordinary people? Just imagine, what if Canada didn't just take a temporary break, but truly turned its back forever? What does that mean? First, border towns like Buffalo, Plattsburgh, or Old Orchard Beach will no longer be familiar gateways for millions of Canadian families. Instead, they will become nostalgic towns, living off the memories of a time when the parking lot was full of Ontario license plates. The decline wasn't just for one summer, but became a long-term condition. Second, once Canadians are accustomed to traveling to Mexico, Europe, or even within Canada, that habit will become ingrained. Once consumer behavior has changed direction, it's extremely difficult to bring them back. Just like when you switched from your usual supermarket for better prices or service, you wouldn't easily go back to the old one. Let's look at real estate. There were quite a few Canadian families who dreamed of buying a vacation home in Florida. But if the unsafe, unrespected mentality is deeply ingrained, they will seek out Mexican beaches or even the Mediterranean. And every house they bought there was an empty house in Florida. Economically, the US will lose not just a few $1 billion in the tourism industry. This could be a permanent gap of about $9 billion per year in trade and services, a figure equal to the entire annual budget of many small states. Politically, the US will lose an important ally in international negotiations. A close, reliable friend, but now pushed away just because of a few policies and thoughtless words. Perhaps the map of the United States will never have a 51st state named Canada. But on the economic map, there will be a gaping hole worth $9 billion. And the remaining question for all of us: will America be wise enough to heed the warning from its northern neighbor before losing not only tourists, but also a friendship that has lasted for over a century? Imagine a new American dream. Florida beaches are still sunny, Vegas is still lit up, Buffalo still has Walmart open, but everything is quieter because the neighbor who used to carry a fat wallet has disappeared. A dream where we lack neither sunshine nor grand slogans, yet we lack the simplest things: customers, work, and stability for the middle-class family. If Canada doesn't return, it won't just be a tourism setback. It will become a long-term crack in the US economy and in the trust of those who once considered us the default destination. The question for all of us is, can ordinary Americans continue to pay the price for distant political decisions in Washington? And you, if you were in the position of a Canadian, would you go back? Please leave your comments below. I would love to hear stories from your own experiences about times when politics directly affected your family's finances or trips. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analyzers. This is where we unpack economic and political stories together, from the perspective of ordinary Americans, not the polished language of the halls. All information in the video is based on public data, reports, and reputable sources. The purpose is to analyze and discuss, not to personally or nationally attack.